Hi, my name is Tyler Johnson, and today I'm going to be talking about the importance of cilia in the human body. Starting off with a pretty basic but necessary question, what are cilia? Cilia are mobile hair-like projections that are responsible for sustaining various physiological functions. It is found on almost every surface of every cell in the human body. Some common places that you've probably heard of it being found is the lungs and the respiratory tract. Moving on to a couple different types of cilia, the first being primary or sensory cilia. This type of cilia is found on the tubal epithelial cells of a kidney. A fun fact about this one is that abnormalities to this type of cilia can cause cysts to form on the kidneys, which is known as polycystic kidney disease. Moving on to the probably more well-known and the most common form of cilia, which is motile cilia. Motile cilia is also known as movement cilia because that is its main function. It is found in the respiratory tract in order to move mucus and particles out of the lungs. It is found in the fallopian tubes in order to transport gametes, and it is also found lining the ventricles of the brain in order to circulate cerebral spinal fluid. This diagram right here is included to show the structural differences between the two types of cilia I talked about today. They have the same basic outer structure, which is a 9 outer microtubule doublet structure. The only difference between the two is that motile cilia have a primary central pair of microtubules in the middle in order to help for that function of movement, which is why sensory cilia lack that central pair. Going back to some basic ciliary function, both cilia and mucus, as shown in this picture right here, are known as the first lines of defense because they are both physical barriers that are ready to protect the body from any foreign invader cells or infections or anything like that. Cilia is also very important in locomotion, as I mentioned before. Movement is a big function of cilia, so that is what locomotion is. And cilia are also very important and play a very important role in fertilization, which I will definitely talk about in more detail later. I just wanted to re-emphasize how important cilia is in the respiratory tract. I'm going to talk about something that is called mucociliary clearance. Mucociliary clearance is a defense mechanism in the lungs. Defense mechanism in order to keep the lungs clear and healthy and free from infection. So this picture right here is actually a diagram of what mucociliary clearance is with the 3 functional components that make it up. I'm going to talk about them individually and then I'm going to refer back to the picture. So the first functional component of mucociliary clearance is a protective mucus layer. As you can see, the mucus layer is that green little stripe on top of the cilia in the diagram. The next one is an airway surface liquid layer. The airway surface liquid layer is the little blue, light blue, clear drawing in the middle of the cilia. It kind of is under the mucus layer. That is responsible for keeping the cilia hydrated in order to keep them moving and functioning properly. The last thing is cilia situated on the cell's surface, obviously. The little pink projections coming off the cells, those are the cilia. Basically what this does is mucus traps particles in the lungs. The cilia is hydrated by that airway surface liquid layer, and then the cilia is able to move that mucus out along with the particles in order to keep the lungs clear. This is super essential for healthy lungs. Cilia is very, very essential for healthy lungs in the respiratory tract. There is something else in the lungs that is another defense mechanism, and it is called a mucociliary escalator. This one is going to be explained through this picture right here to make it a little bit easier. Basically, the mucociliary escalator, as I said, is a defense mechanism. It is made up of pseudostratified columnar epithelial cells. Pseudostratified meaning ciliated cells. Basically, I'm going to have you take a look at this picture right here and notice that there are 2 different zones in the lungs. There's the conducting zone and there's the respiratory zone. The respiratory zone is simply responsible for gas exchange in the alveoli, and the conducting zone is where the mucociliary apparatus is. So I'm going to use a little analogy here. Imagine crowd surfing at a concert. The crowd surfer who jumps into the crowd can be represented by a ball of mucus, and the thousands of people holding him up can be cilia. My point here is that it takes thousands of people to hold up one person, just as it takes multiple cilia to move a ball of mucus. Another point that I want to make here is that crowd surfing is moving. They're moving a performer from the back of the stage to the front, side to side. The whole point is that there's movement going on. Same in the mucociliary escalator, the cilia are moving the mucus out of the lungs, and this is what keeps the lungs clear and healthy. As you can see on this side, there's a healthy mucociliary escalator, which is keeping particles moving out of the lungs at a solid rate. So the conducting zone is nice and clear and there's no infection or debris in the lungs. On the other side, you can see just the opposite happening. The cilia, for some reason, is not functioning properly. It is not moving mucus or particles out at a sufficient speed. So it is causing a buildup in the conducting zone, which overall can be harmful to your respiratory tract and your lungs. Something that is also very important in the amount of gunk and mucus that is taken out of your respiratory tract and just cilia in general is ciliary beat frequency. This can basically be timed by the individual beat cycles of a single cilia. There are two different strokes in something that is known as a single ciliary beat. There is an effective stroke and there is a recovery stroke. Those two strokes are shown in this picture right here. The main thing that I wanted to point out is that they're both going in different directions. Their movements counteract each other, and that is actually how the movement occurs. As you can see, there's different arrows pointing to which way they're moving, and that creates the movement itself. The most important thing about this that I wanted to bring up is that ciliary beat frequency actually does not stay stagnant the entire time. There's a point where it changes, and that point is ovulation. It changes at ovulation, it increases. Ciliary beat frequency increases, meaning that the cilia are moving faster and are able to move things around faster. This is pretty important because when it comes to fertilization and pregnancy, this can help a successful pregnancy occur just due to the fact that gametes are being moved in the tubal pregnancy correctly and fast enough. So I just wanted to put an emphasis on the fact that ciliary beat frequency is also very helpful, and the fact that it increases at ovulation is something that can benefit a mother who wants a successful pregnancy. So now that I've talked a little bit about ovulation and cilia in the reproductive system, I'm going to put an emphasis on how important it is in the reproductive system, specifically female reproductive system right now, just as I put an emphasis on how important cilia is in the respiratory system. Basically, cilia is very important in the reproductive system regarding tubal transport. There's a few different things that cilia move along in the reproductive tract, and I'm going to share a couple of those right now. First of all, cilia is very important in moving an ovum from the fallopian tubes to the uterus. It is also very important for pushing a spermatozoa to meet an ovum. Once the spermatozoa and the ovum come together, it is known as a zygote, and the cilia is then responsible for pushing that zygote to the mom's uterus in order for that to implant so you have a successful pregnancy. I just wanted to put an emphasis on how important cilia is in this fertilization process and this pregnancy process, because now I'm going to talk about a few things that can harm cilia and cause unsuccessful pregnancies. First of all, one major thing that affects cilia is nicotine. Nicotine can cause cilia damage, it can cause impaired mucociliary clearance, and it can cause reduced ciliary beat frequency. The reason why this is so detrimental to a pregnancy is because if cilia cannot push the gametes in the right direction, then a tubal pregnancy might occur. Something might end up not going right if the gametes cannot be transferred fast enough or at the right pace. Impaired mucociliary clearance is more of a respiratory tract issue. That's when gunk is going to build up in the lungs. Reduced ciliary beat frequency, once again, this causes decreased fertility because it reduces the chances of a zygote being able to travel to the uterus at a healthy speed due to the impaired cilia. But if a spermatozoa can meet with an ovum to form a zygote, then that zygote might have trouble getting to the uterus due to that cilia damage. As you can see right here, I have a picture of healthy non-smokers versus healthy smokers. Healthy not meaning that smoking is a good thing, but healthy meaning everything else is okay, but they just smoke. And as you can see, there's significantly reduced cilia. It's almost like having very brittle hair. The reason why this is so detrimental is that it can cause ciliary dysfunctions in a mother. Like I talked about, it causes decreased fertility because that ovum and the spermatozoa is not able to meet due to the fact that cilia is not pushing them along the right paths or directions. It can also cause an ectopic pregnancy, like I talked about earlier. If a spermatozoa is able to meet with an ovum and it is able to form a zygote, that zygote is going to have a really hard time traveling to the uterus because of the damaged cilia. This is very detrimental to a mother. A tubal pregnancy is something or an ectopic pregnancy rather, is something that is implanted outside of the main cavity of the uterus. A tubal pregnancy, it would be implanted in the fallopian tube, and an abdominal pregnancy, it would be implanted in the peritoneal cavity and the abdominal muscles. So some signs and symptoms of an ectopic pregnancy. A tubal pregnancy where the baby is implanted in the fallopian tube, like I said, is very dangerous. 99.9% fatal to the mother. It will burst. It will cause vaginal bleeding and lots of vaginal pain. Sometimes even shoulder pain, because if blood is coming from the fallopian tube, that is one of the symptoms, which is kind of weird, but I thought that was interesting. And another thing, an intra-abdominal pregnancy, like I talked about, that would cause very bad intra-abdominal pain and very bad intra-abdominal bleeding. This diagram right here, the one on top, which is labeled A, shows what the fallopian tube pregnancy actually looks like. As you can see, the fallopian tube is a lot bigger than it should be because the baby is developing in that tube. In the picture below it, in picture B, there shows the result of a salpingectomy, which is the removal of one or both of the fallopian tubes. In this case, it is just the removal of the left fallopian tube. They had to remove that in order to keep the mother alive, in this case, unfortunately. I would just like to thank Dr. Jacqueline Powell for giving me all of the resources and helping me with all my questions in order for me to complete this project. I would also like to thank my teaching assistant, Reese Zerfla, for answering all my emails and questions and helping me out with some of the physiology of my project. I would also like to thank the Department of Health and Human Sciences, the Frank R. Seaver College of Science and Engineering at Loyola Marymount University for giving me all of the tools and resources to complete this presentation. Here are my references. I'll take any questions at this time as well. And here are my picture references. Thank you.